Hi there and welcome to the Sew Along. So this garment today is a knit fabric, so we're going to be using 6mm, which is 1/4 inch seam allowances. I'm going to sew this using 4 threads on my overlocker, so when you're ready, set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric. And when we overlock, we're only going to overlock on the raw edge. There's no need to cut off any fabric when you sew. We're just going to use our overlocker blade to trim off any fraying threads or any extra threads as we go through. So as well as the overlocker, you'll need a plain sewing machine. You might need to lengthen your stitch length from normal and put a ball needle in your machine. The ball needle will help with any ladders or any holes that we could put in the machine. So let's get started. You're probably going to need access to a cover stitch machine to do your hem with, or you could use a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine. I'm just going to sew 2 rows of plain stitching with my sewing machine, but you could of course set up your cover stitcher and do that. So the version I'm going to sew is the thumb hole sleeve version, simply because the plain sleeve version is very simple. You can just turn up the hem and stitch. So let's get started. So let's start off with the hood. The hood is lined, so I'm going to sew the main part of my hood in this grey, and I'm going to sew the lining in the black. The very first thing we need to do with the hood is to put an opening for our draw cord if you're having one. So on the pattern there is a drill hole marked to show us the position of the opening. Now it's up to you whatever you want to do here. You could put a metal eyelet in, a grommet, you could stitch a buttonhole, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch an eyelet. Now when you're stitching through knit fabrics, sometimes you need to put some stabilizer under them. So I've just got some tearaway stabilizer I'm going to put at the bottom just to cover my feed dogs, and then I'm going to stitch the eyelet. So when you're ready, go ahead and put your eyelets on. Now you need to have them on the right side, and just do whatever you prefer. Buttonholes are fine. Okay, so there we have it. I've sewn a small eyelet hole, and now I'm going to use my awl and punch a hole. Now just bear in mind, whatever size you sew this, your draw cord needs to be able to fit through it. So that's why sometimes a buttonhole can be handy. So once you've stitched your eyelets, buttonholes, grommets, whatever you choose to do, place your hood pieces right side together, and we're going to overlock the long curved edge here. Now as you go around, there will be double notches that you need to match, and that's just to keep everything in place. So making sure you have 4 threads in your overlocker, we're going to stitch around from the centre back neck all around that outside curve. And remember, we're not cutting anything off with our blade, we're just going to stitch on the edge and use the blade to cut off any fraying. Right, oh, the other thing I didn't mention is I'm sewing this today in a really buttery soft 2x2 ribbing fabric. It's really soft. I am aware that this might make the final garment slightly larger, so if you do choose to make this in a ribbing, it'll probably sit and hang beautifully, but you may find it's larger than you probably want to, so you may want to go down a size. Alright, so when you've finished the main part of the hood, take the hood lining pieces, and if you have a contrast colour, make sure you change the overlocking thread. I'm not going to bother. I've checked all my tensions and this should be fine. So when you're ready, make sure those pieces are right side together and stitch exactly the same seam. So that's the long curve seam. So when you're ready, we're going to sew these hoods together, right side together. So take the main piece, the outside piece, and open it up and match that to the lining piece. So we want right sides together, matching that seam we just sewed at the center top of the hood. So what we're doing is sewing from the base of the neck here, making sure these are right sides together, all the way through to the same position on the other side on this long straight seam. Now bear in mind, if you're using two different types of fabric, like I am, you might find you just need to ease one of them into place to make sure that they sew in the correct position. The main thing is to make sure that that center back, which is the top of the hood, matches. Now as you reach this seam up here, you might find it easier if you have each of those seams facing in a different direction. Just reduces the bulk there. Right, so when you're finished, turn this through so wrong sides are together and right sides are out, and just check your work. So now we're going to stitch the stitch line for the draw cord to go through. If you don't like threading these draw cords afterwards, of course you could tuck this in now and stitch around, making sure you don't catch the drawstring. Entirely up to you. We're going to stitch at 2 centimeters, which is 3/4 of an inch from the edge. So making sure that edge is fully pushed out, match the notches here and stitch. Now if you're like me and you've got a contrast fabric underneath, you might want to change your bobbin thread. So that's what I'm going to do now, is I'm just going to take out the grey and put in black. So I'll have grey on top and black underneath, because you're going to see a lot of this lining when the hood is being worn down. The other thing you need to make sure of is that your stitch length is slightly longer from normal, and that you have a ball needle in here. Using a ball needle will make sure that your knit fabric, that the needle doesn't pierce through the fibres and the threads, so the yarns don't split and create a hole. It'll just help with that. You normally don't need to back tack, but I am, just because I'm feeling this fabric is a little bit soft. So just make sure when you stitch that 2 centimeter, 3/4 of an inch channel, that you push this all the way out to the edge as you go. So I'm going to go ahead now and feed my drawstring through my hood, simply because I think it's going to be a little bit harder to do later, but that's entirely up to you. Just go ahead and feed it through the eyelet from the right side through to the same position on the other side. Okay, so pop that away somewhere safe and we'll move on. Alright, so now we're going to sew the back together. So we're going to sew the upper back to the lower back, and the upper back is called the yoke, and you'll find in the middle of the straight seam you will find a double notch. So that shows us where the middle of the yoke is at the back. So we want to place that right sides together to the lower back. So the side you're sewing it to is the shorter edge, because the longer edge is the bottom. So in the middle of this edge you'll find a double notch as well. So we're going to place these right sides together, and we're going to overlock them from the underarm point to the underarm point. So just pop this aside for a moment and we will work on the front hem. Right, so this is the front hem area. The long straight edge is the lower edge of the front. And this shows us that we have a 4 centimetre seam allowance. I'm just trying to think what that is. That's 4 centimetres is 2 lots of 3/4 of an inch. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it at the notch, and then we want to sew through this line here, through the overlocking line. So if you have a cover stitcher, turn at the notches there and stitch this down. I'm going to assume you don't have access to a cover stitcher, and I'm going to overlock on the raw edge, and then I'm going to sew a double line of stitching with my plain sewing machine. Now before I sew that into place, what I'm going to do is go to my iron and press up that seam allowance. Sorry, press up that hem allowance. And while I'm on the job, I'm going to take my yoke and give that area a press as well. And I want the seam to face downwards, so I want that seam to face towards the hem. So what I'm going to do is stitch through my overlocking line. I'm going to sew 2 lines of stitching. You could use a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine, or of course if you had access to a cover stitcher, that's ideally the best thing. So I'm just sewing through my overlocking line just to hide the line of stitching, really, just to keep it all nice and tidy. And my second line of stitching is just really to mimic the look of a cover stitch. I'm going to stitch it on the fold side, and I'm going to stitch it parallel to the first line of stitching, and I'm going to use foot width, which is 5mm, whatever you prefer. Now you can see that this is bobbling a bit. Now that's mainly because this is a ribbing fabric and it's super stretchy. What I'm going to do is take that to the iron and give that another press. If you're using something heavier like a sweatshirting or a French terry, you'll find that that probably won't happen, but certainly pressing will get rid of that bobbling, and it'll also just help embed the stitches into the fabric and give you a really lovely finished garment. Right, so the next seams we're going to sew are the shoulders. So take that front and make sure it's right side up, and then take the back and place that right side down. So we have right sides together matching the shoulders. I'll just turn that over so the front's on top, and we're just going to overlock that shoulder seam together. And then come right across and do the other shoulder seam. Now you'll notice when you do the shoulder seam, the front one will just sit slightly over like this, because that's what we need. We need this to match exactly at the 6mm 1/4 of an inch stitch line. So at the neck edge you will find that the front sits slightly over, but it should fit perfectly at the armhole edge. Right, so now it's time to get our sleeves. So here are our sleeves. There's 2 cut on the fold. Normally the sleeves I do are not on the fold sleeves, but for this pattern they are. So you have 2 identical sleeves. There will be a notch at the top. It doesn't matter which one you use for which side. So as long as you have right sides together, you'll be fine. So when we look at the sleeves, there'll be a notch almost at the top to help us match in the ease. And then there will be a notch at the crown here, the crown notch, and that will match to our shoulder seam. So when you're ready, take a sleeve and take that shoulder seam that we've just sewn. Now this is the back because you can see the yoke here. So making sure we have right sides together. I'll just go get some pins, just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that, we've got pins. So the very centre of the sleeve, the crown notch will sew to that shoulder seam there. I'll just pin that in place. And then as we come down towards the back, that notch will match there. Right, so what we're going to do is just ease that sleeve in from the underarm all the way through, making sure that those points match. Just be a little bit careful that there's not too much bulk here at the underarm, and make sure that seam is pushed down towards the hemline. So if you struggle, the easiest thing to do is just match the beginning, just sew a couple of stitches, so just an inch or so, a couple of centimetres. And that sort of anchors your work. It works like another pair of hands and just gives you a little extra space to work with. And it's also a good idea if your sleeve is on top and the body of the garment is underneath. Now as you reach the shoulder position here, that shoulder seam needs to face towards the back of the garment. So just make sure that that seam's facing the back. Now on the other side of the sleeve, the front, there won't be a notch to match, it doesn't matter. We'll just make sure that that all sits in the right way. Okay, so just double check your sleeve before you go any further, and then go ahead and put it in on the other side. So now we have to overlock the edge of the lower front. So take your lower front piece, which looks like this, and on one side you'll see a bit of a dog leg. So this is where we attach the upper part of the front to. I'd like you to overlock this dog leg edge all the way down to the hemline on both pieces. Now when you've done that, go to your iron and press that to the wrong side. We want to press that by 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. So now we're going to sew the lower front to the front, and yes, I could have done this earlier, but it can get a bit confusing if you did it. So this is a bit bulky, but please forgive me for that. So here is the left side of the front, right side up as you wear it. So here's the hem here, right side up. And here is the same side, lower front. And there's that hem that we just pressed up. So what we're going to do is match this to here like this. So this angle here sews to this part here. Now there'll be a small notch, and the notch is where the edge of this fold is. And that's just so we can turn that up. So I'm going to pin that into place like that, and I'm just going to overlock that seam there. So it's only a short seam, and at the top of it you'll find a little triangle. That's fine as long as our stitch line at 6mm, 1/4 inch is exactly right. So just get that under your machine like so. And sew that down. Make sure you take out this pin. Don't want to be running over pins, and we just want to overlock all. Because what we're going to be doing now, of course, is putting the side seam hem in there at that 1.5 centimetre, 9/16 of an inch mark there. So go ahead and do that to the other side. Find the other side. Right side up. So here's a step you don't have to do, which I've just chosen to do simply because it will tidy the edge up. Because of the nature of overlocking, you might find that where you finish the edge of the overlocking here and where the fold begins here are different. All you need to do is get your plain machine and just run a row of stitching from around about the top here of the hem allowance to the exact point this fold meets the bottom edge there. You can see the angle there. So what that will do will mean, when we go to do our hem at the front, the lower front, just gives us an absolutely perfect transition there. So that side, you can see I only just slightly went out. My overlocking on the other side to do exactly the same thing was quite out. So you can see what I've had to do here. But what that does is it just really does give it a lovely, lovely finish to start the hem allowance on the sides of the lower front. Right, so now I'm going to sew the hem, that 1.5 centimetre or 9/16 of an inch hem that we put in. I'm going to sew that into place. I'm going to sew this from the right side. You can sew it from the wrong side if you want, but I'm sewing it from the right side because I want my stitching here to meet up perfectly with the edge. You don't have to, you could just stop your stitching here at the lower fold if you wanted to. It's up to you. I might start on the inside line of stitching first. And I can actually feel my hem allowance in there, so where you do this from, as I said, entirely up to you. You should be able to feel it depending on the type of fabric you choose. Just remember to back tack, and I'm just basically feeling for that edge of the overlocking on my way down. Right, so I'm going to repeat that on the other side, and then I'm going to go and give that a really good press. So now it's time to sew the underarm and the side seam all at once. Now if you're doing the long sleeve version, after you've done this you can just sew the hem. I'm going to sew the thumb hole version. We'll deal with that in a moment. So this is the sleeve, this is the sleeve with the wrist opening end here, so make sure this is right sides together. And we're going to go to our overlocker and overlock this edge here. So I've just gone through the underarm seam, so make sure that underarm seam matches, and as we come down the side you'll find a notch to match. Now you'll come to another notch here. Now this notch here is the position that the piece we just sewed onto needs to match to. Just make sure that's all nice and smooth. And then as we come down the side seam there'll be another notch to match. And this is basically because we're going on an angle, it's like a bias, so things can stretch out of place. So just make sure those notches do match properly. Way to the hem, and you'll see the hem notch there at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. When you've done that side, repeat it on the other side. So now we're going to sew the extension piece with the thumb holes in it. Place one of these pieces right sides together. This is the fold, and match the notches on this side. Now I guess you could do this with your overlocker, but it'll be easier to do it with your plain sewing machine. We're going to sew from at 6 mil, so at foot width here. We're going to sew from the edge up to and stop directly opposite the first notch there. We're going to leave a gap going to come and start stitching directly opposite the next notch. And stop there, leave a gap, and the same at the other end. And remember to back tack through all of those. So now we're going to fold this so we have wrong sides together. And as you can tell, that's where our thumb's going to come out. But this is where it gets a bit awkward. What we have to do is sew that side to that side, but around the other way, and that side to that side, but around the other way. So, what we're going to do is just fold those in, like that. And we want to just grab them. So when we grab them, we want to grab them so they're like that. We're twisting them around. Once you've got them like that, we're going to sew from that notch at 6mm to the other end. So between those notches. So if you pop that back through again, it's so hard to describe. You're going to get yourself a bit confused about this. I know I did the first time I did it. So as you can tell, we've now sealed that opening there. So now we have to do the same on this side. So I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of, you've got to turn those through like that, and then sort of just pinch them from underneath like that. And if you get it near one of the ends like that, then turn it through, holding that the whole time. That's that end there. Just match it all up. Sew a couple of stitches to secure. Back tack it. And then you can sort of unfold it through to the other side. There, and stitch it, and back tack it. When you twist it through again, there is our lower thumb hole opening. So this is going to sew to the bottom of the sleeve, and our hand goes through like that, and that becomes our thumb hole opening. Now I know that might seem a little bit confusing. I don't know a better way to describe how to do it. Hopefully you'll get that. So now you've done this one, go ahead and repeat it for the other one. Okay, so to sew this into the lower arm, the what you're probably going to find easier is if you quarter this sleeve off. So what that means is just fold that on the edge there and mark a notch directly opposite there, and then match your notch like so, so the seam to the notch there, and mark a notch. So no different as if you were going to do elastic or anything like that. So we've quartered this off. The reason for this is because this thumb hole opening is turned towards the front, and this needs to sit to the quarter front mark, which is marked the notch on the lower edge of the sleeve. Basically we just want to make sure that the thumb doesn't sit on the underarm line. So do that for one and do that for the other. So just find the direct opposite place and mark, and then match those two edges like so, and mark there and there. And now let's put that into the lower part of our sleeve. So apologies, I've managed to lose the video for that section I've just done on sewing this in, but what we're doing is garment wrong side out, place the cuff inside like that, and you want to match the notch on the lower sleeve, which is at the front, with that opening, and then one of the quarters will match to the underarm seam, and then just sew it through and then pull through like so, and repeat on the other side. Next we're going to move on to the hood. Okay, so for option 2 cuff, this is just a bit of an easier way of doing a thumb hole cuff. So what I've done is I've placed these pieces right side up with the top at the top, so that's the part that's going to attach to the bottom of the sleeve, and then this is the hem edge, and we can see the notches for our hem turn position, which is at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. We also have notches along the top here, and when we cut this piece out, we're cutting out one this way and one that way, and the buttonhole position, you will see there's one on this side and one on that side. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and stitch in a buttonhole. Make the buttonhole as large as your machine will possibly do, so I mean as long as it will go, but make sure the end position here is at that mark, but it can go as far deep towards the top as you can, but it really shouldn't come any further down than this position here, and that's actually from the edge here, it's 3 centimeters, which is 1 3/16 of an inch. So you've got your 1.5 centimeters, and then which is 9/16 of an inch, and then you've got 3 centimeters here, which is 1 3/16 of an inch. So go ahead now and stitch in your buttonholes in those marked positions. So once you have that buttonhole in place, go ahead and slash it if you want to, or you can do it later if it's easier. Make an opening for it. And next what we're going to do is fold this piece right sides together like this, and overlock together this edge here. Right, so now we can hem this piece. If you have a cover stitch, go ahead and cover stitch it. The hem is the edge with the notch, so the notch shows us that the hem is at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is just overlock the raw edge and then plain stitch. So when this is being worn, the thumb will just sit through like so. And that's the reason you need the biggest buttonhole setting you possibly can, is because if you're not careful, there won't be enough room for your thumb to go through. Now go ahead and attach this to the bottom of the sleeve, the same as the other sleeve cuff option. Before we overlock the hood into place, I'm just going to run a little tack stitch. Take your hood and bring it to your machine. So place it like this. Make sure that these cords, if you've put them through already, are out of the way. You'll see a small notch here at the bottom of our stitching line on each side. We want to place that notch on top of each other. And you want to make sure that it's right side over left side when this is right side up. So as if you were wearing it, we want right over left, and we want those two notches to match, which is the stitching line. And when you've got that, just take your machine and just run a tack stitch and hold that into place like so. And while I'm here, I'm just going to tidy up that overlocking thread. So we just want to hold that into place before we overlock. For the hood, take your garment and place it so it's wrong sides out, like this. The front at the front and the back at the back. And then take this hood and, making sure it's right side out, put that inside. Now, making sure that these cords are out of the way, that area we just tack stitched together, so that notch there is going to match to the notch at the center of the front. So we want that to sit on top of each other. And then when you've got that in place, pin that. Now if you come to the back neck of your garment here, there's two notches there, and we want those to match to the centre back seam, which is the seam on our hood, that long curved seam. So make sure that that seam is in the centre of those notches and pin that into place. And then as we come around, you'll see a notch here for the shoulder, and that notch there will sit on that notch there for the lining, and that will sit on that shoulder seam like so, and pin that into place. And then come to the other side and do exactly the same thing. Now when we overlock that together, make sure that that seam at the shoulder faces towards the back of the garment. And when you start overlocking, don't overlock from the centre back, because it's always too obvious. Start sewing one side or other of that shoulder seam. So I'll just start to the front of that shoulder seam so I don't have to take out that pin. It's just a matter of making sure that all three of those edges match beautifully. Take out the pin. So almost the last step, I'm going to run a line of overlocking on the hem so I can complete the hem. So we're on to the hem. I've pressed up the hem by 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch. And you'll notice at the front it creates this sort of dog leg. I couldn't really pattern that out. I mean, I could have, but it would have made it look a bit nasty. So what we're going to do is just fold this corner in at that line there. You can tuck in that line of overlocking and then fold that up. And you can just adjust that until you get a nice angle. It's probably the best way of hiding it. You might have better suggestions. And then what I'm going to do is stitch through the stitch line there. Now of course, if you have a cover stitcher, twin needle, that's all great. Back tack to begin and end. Right, so go ahead and give that seam a really good press, and then the very, very last thing we have to do is come to your ties here and decide on a way of finishing them. I always find an easy way of finishing them is just to cut them off on an angle and just knot. And then just roll the knot down to the edge. Now I've suggested a length of 150 centimetres, metre and a half. Not sure what that is in yards. I'll work that out and put it in the captions. Entirely up to you. You can of course use a nice long shoelace, that's always a nice way, or if you want to finish these off with toggles or caps, you can easily buy those as well. So that's it, our garment is finished. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy this garment and join me again soon for my next sew along video, and don't forget to join my Facebook pattern discussion group and the links in the comments.